as we mentioned at the beginning of this retreat today, symbols have to be interpreted according to their historical context. And they are often inspired by images found by the prophets in the prophets of the Old Testament. They're never exactly the same. They can be fluid also, and they can have more than one meaning. So this is part of it. So let's talk about symbolic numbers. 3.5. That's half of 7. Sometimes the Bible writes it, a New Revelation writes it as 1,260 days or 42 months. It's the same. It's 3.5 years. It's half of the perfect number, which is 7. 7 is considered the perfect number, the ideal number. We have the number 12 for the 12 tribes or the 12 apostles, and we have the number 24. That's in the throne room scene. 12 tribes, 12 apostles. They represent the people of God. 144,000 is 12 times 12, plus the number 1,000, which is a very big number in the Bible. There's no number that's larger than thousands. They didn't have a concept of millions. If they want to indicate something beyond that, they will say myriads of myriads. That's not a number. So we're going to talk about Revelation 12 and Revelation 13, where the beasts appear. But this one, the woman clothed in the sun, I mean, there's lots of things that we could talk about. But let's go ahead and talk about the woman clothed in the sun. A great portent appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was with child, and she cried out in pangs of birth, in anguish for delivery. So the woman of chapter 12, most people would think it's the Virgin Mary, but it's not. Even though we are going to find out she's giving birth to a male child, and of course it's the Messiah. Another portent from heaven appeared in heaven, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. A diadem is a crown. So that part is underlined so that you'll pay attention to the description of the dragon: 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 diadems. His tail cast down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them on the earth. And he stood before the woman who was about to bear the child, that he might devour it when she brought it forth. So he's waiting to destroy this child that the woman is about to give birth to. She brought forth a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. That's a messianic prophecy. So we know that she's giving birth to the Messiah. But her child, the dragon wanted to destroy him, but he didn't succeed. The child was caught up to God in his throne. In other words, he wasn't around very long. Okay, and the woman fled to the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God for which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. 1,260 days. I think I must have put the wrong number before. Okay, so 1,200. So that's half. That's the 3.5 years. This is not the Theotokos. It is for Catholics. Catholics read this portion of Revelation on December 8th, which is for them the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. It's the conception of the Theotokos for us. They identify her with this, but it is not. The woman is the church. The church gives birth to the Messiah, the people of God. In the old days, it was Israel. Now it's the church. And we know it's not her because we're continuing here. Notice that she flees into the desert, where she's protected by God for 3.5 years. 3.5 years is a significant length of time, but it's not considered too long. Okay? Now, how do we know it's not the Virgin Mary? Because she didn't flee to the desert. It's not a description of her. It's actually, in many ways, a description of what happened in the church during periods of persecution. People would flee to the desert, and that's how monasticism started. People had to get away from the cities where they were getting arrested. So they would go off and they would live in wilderness areas. Usually, of course, in the Middle East, that's a desert. And they kind of liked it, and they started living out there. And monasticism began in the desert, partly for that reason. They felt close to God. They were praying a lot. So she goes off into the desert. Now, The next part of chapter 13, oh, this is chapter 12, I'm sorry, is a flashback. The dragon wants to kill the woman's offspring. He wants to devour her and the offspring. Now we're going to find out why. So when I told you that the book of Revelation has to be about the future, not in this case, because this is explaining to us the motivation of the dragon. And it's about the fall of Satan from heaven. Okay, so this is why I said this is a flashback. So in this case, John is taking the time to explain to us why the devil hates the church and wants to destroy us. Okay, so here we go. And here you have, this is Michael, the archangel Michael. He's very small over here on the gate. You know that we have the two archangels usually on the gates. And the one with the sword is Michael. He's considered the captain of the heavenly armies. So here he is with another sword. A war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, and they were defeated, and there was no longer a place for them in heaven. So there's a famous story, I don't know where this comes from, someplace in the tradition, about Michael. So you know in the divine liturgy we say the words stomen kalos, let us stand aright. But kalos isn't really a right, it's like saying well. Let's stand firm. Let's stand well. Stomen metafovo. You know that stomen kalos, let us stand aright. Let us stand with fear, that we may offer the holy, liturgy in peace. That is in the new divine liturgy because this is what Michael said to the angels in heaven when the devil rebelled. Stomen kalos. So when somebody is threatening your faith, say to yourself and to others around you, stomen kalos. Let us stand aright. Let us stand in fear. Let us, in other words, remain faithful, is what he's saying. Stomen kalos. The great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent. Now we find out the identity of the dragon. The ancient serpent, the one from the Garden of Eden, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. So, of course, there's a couple of places that mention the fall of Satan, but that is part more of Jewish ancient tradition. It's referenced here probably more clearly than anywhere else, but also in Isaiah and also in Luke, Jesus says, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. But other than that, what happened, why the devil hates humanity is known to us from the earliest tradition, but really comes out of Judaism. So now what has happened? The devil has been thrown out. He rebelled against God. He threw out, he and a third of the angels fell. They can't stay in heaven if they're rebelling against God. Immediately they fell. And now we hear this voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come down. For the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even unto death. So first of all, we know how we conquer Satan. We conquer Satan through the blood of the Lamb because Christ died for us and he conquered death and Satan. And by the word of our testimony, by remaining faithful to God and testifying to God, saying the truth, which has become more and more difficult even in our own times. That to love not even your own life, even to death. Now the voice is saying this, rejoice, O heaven, and you that dwell on earth. Why? Because you dwell therein. Why should they rejoice? Because heaven is, the devil is no longer in heaven. The demons are not in heaven. They fell to earth. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows his time is short. He knows he's going to be judged. He knows he's going to end up in hell. He's very angry. And so watch out, earth. Okay, in other words, this is the flashback. This is describing what happened in heaven, how the devil, rebelled against God, how he was cast out. Earlier that was mentioned by the tail of the dragon, taking down a third of the stars. So he lost a third of the angels became demons. Woe to you, watch out down there on earth, because the devil is here, he's really angry, and he knows he only has so much time. His time is short. So this is the flashback telling us why the dragon wants to destroy the church. So now we're picking up with the story of the woman. When the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to earth, he pursued the woman who had borne the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of the great eagle, that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness to the place where she was to be nourished for a time, and 2 times, and half a time. That's 3.5. We see the same kind of idea. It's an unknown period of time, but not an extremely long. Okay, so he's still pursuing her. He wants to destroy her. And this, again, is how we know that this is not the Virgin Mary. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth on the woman to sweep her away with the flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened his mouth and swallowed the river with the dragon had poured out from his mouth. Water is considered kind of a catastrophic, especially for the Jewish people. Water, the sea were always images of destruction. You'd think that they wouldn't be because they're in a desert area, but large amounts of water were images of destruction. But the point is here that God is saving the people, protecting them from the dragon here. Then the dragon was angry with the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring. Oh, who's that? Those who obey the commandments and bear testimony to Jesus. Those are the offspring of the woman. So this is the people of God. First the Jewish people, then of course now it's the church. The church bears us. We're the church. We're born in the church. And there's lots of references to things like this in the tradition of the church, that the church is the Virgin Mother who gives birth to the children, and that's us, all of us. Now, this is the very end of chapter 12. It's very dramatic. The dragon has tried to destroy the church. He can't. And now but he wants to make war on the rest of her offspring, on everybody else. And he stood on the sand of the sea. That's the dramatic pause. He takes his stance. And as he's standing on the sand of the sea, we have the beginning, right after that, chapter 13, where we see the appearance of the beasts. So he's standing on the sand of the sea, and he's going to call up, this is the dragon now, couldn't destroy the woman, takes a stance by the sand of the sea, and he's going to call up the first beast. And this is the beast of the sea. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads and 10 diadems upon its heads, and a blasphemous name upon its heads. Okay? This is the beast of the sea. I'm going to go back. The sea, the beast of the sea, is the Roman Empire and or the Roman emperor. So I told you before that there's an identification of the empire with the emperor. Just like if somebody sees our flag, they think America. They see a picture of Trump, they think America because he's the president. So they identify the leader or a symbol with the country. For the Romans, what we call the Mediterranean Sea, they called it our sea. Because the Roman Empire was centered around the Mediterranean Sea. And so it was identified with Roman Empire and Roman power. So he's calling up, this is the devil now, the dragon, is calling up the first beast. It's the beast of the sea. It is the Roman Empire. It is the Roman emperor. So he has, notice the description, 10 horns and 7 heads with 10 diadems upon its horns. So he looks just like the dragon, and he has the power of the dragon. The dragon is Satan. And blasphemous names on its heads. Well, what kind of blasphemous names? The Roman emperors had all kinds of titles like Son of God and Savior and other blasphemies. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, and its feet were like a bear's, and his mouth was like a lion. And to it, the dragon gave his power and his throne and his great authority. So this is a monster. So it's not like here somebody made an artistic depiction of what this kind of an animal would look like, but that's kind of not the point. The idea is it's ferocious, and it's kind of a monster, and it's something that kills you, and it's violent. And to this creature, the dragon gave his power throne, and authority. And I told you, what's this first beast? It's the Roman Empire. Okay, how do we know that? The dragon gave to it all of its power and authority. In other words, what he's trying to say is that the Roman Empire has its power from the devil. And that's why it's persecuting the church. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth followed the beast with wonder. This is Nero, the mortal wound. Now, Nero killed himself. Nero was a very strange fellow and did a lot of really weird things and very demented. He was engaged in a lot of debauchery, a lot of very perverse practices. He did a lot of things that were very embarrassing to the Roman people. And finally, of course, a fire started. People suspected Nero of having started the fire because soon after the fire, he did relief. 3/4 of the city of Rome burnt to the ground. And another portion of it was damaged. So it was absolutely catastrophic. And Nero set about kind of giving relief and giving people tents and things like that. But soon thereafter, he began to build a palace on this site where he had wanted to build before, but there was no land available because it was the city of Rome. It was all taken. So because they had known about his plans to build this, basically a palace just for parties, they knew about that, and then he all of a sudden has all this land available. People suspected that he was behind the fire. Is it possible? It's possible. Okay, he didn't literally light it himself, but if he wasn't behind it, he certainly took advantage of it. So what happened was, after the fire, the Roman Senate and his other bizarre behaviors, the Roman Senate said, we're going to arrest Nero. And he didn't want to be arrested because he knew he would have to face trial. He might be exiled, or he might, face some kind of punishment. And so he decided to commit suicide. And he was so egotistical. The stories about Nero were so famous. But he says, supposedly his last words are, "What an artist the world loses in me." And he stabbed himself with a little dagger right here under in his neck, under his head, at the carotid artery, and he bled to death very quickly. Now, he seems to have a mortal wound, but the wound was healed. You don't recover from a mortal wound. Mortal means you die. He did have a mortal wound. He did die. How did it recover? He's one of the heads. He's one of the emperors. Now, what happened was Nero did not leave a successor. And so after Nero's death, there was civil war in the city of Rome for a year. It's called the Year of 4 Emperors. So there was a civil war, and people were fighting. People from very famous and powerful Roman families began to fight for the throne. It was captured first by Galba. Galba was a Roman. These were people who were part of the Roman Senate. They were very high-ranking, very wealthy, and established Roman families. Galba took the throne for a few months. He was murdered by the next guy, Otho. He ruled for a few months, and he was murdered by the next guy, Vitellius. And then, the people became very frightened that this was going to be the end of the Roman Empire, because one guy would take the throne, and then there was an uprising against him, and he was murdered. The next guy took the throne, and he was murdered. So people became alarmed. It looked like the whole empire was going to fall apart. That's why it looked like a mortal wound, but it was healed. How did it get healed? The father of Domitian, Vespasian, whom I mentioned in the last one, he was a general, and he was proclaimed emperor, went to Rome and stopped all of it and stabilized the empire. And so when that happened, people were amazed. And what did they say? It looked like the empire was going to end. It looked like it was falling apart. And the whole world followed the beast with wonder. Men worshipped the dragon, for he had given authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" So why did they say that? Because Rome seemed so powerful. No one could fight against Rome. No one could successfully fight against Rome. So why are they worshiping the dragon, the devil? Because they're worshiping the beast. In other words, if you worship the Roman emperor, you're really worshiping Satan. Okay, so this is what they're saying. Because people said, wow, this is impressive. The empire recovered after Nero, and it went on. And the beast was given a mouth, uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. That's half of 7. It opens its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. And it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. So notice that I've underlined here, it was allowed. It was allowed. God allowed the Roman Empire to make war on the saints, okay? It was allowed. In other words, evil, even the devil, has no power in himself. This is important for us to remember because sometimes we become afraid. So this is also something we should teach young children, especially when they're afraid. Make the sign of the cross. Nothing is stronger than the sign of the cross. Even the devil flees. When you make the sign of the cross, imagine that. He's really very wimpy. We're afraid of him, but he's actually very wimpy. Make the sign of the cross and tell him to get lost. He's wimpy. He doesn't have the power to stand up, just to us in the sign of the cross. So even the devil must have permission. Just like we see in the book of Job, God allows the devil to test us. He allows us to do these things. So this is being allowed. This is what John is telling his congregations. It's being allowed. Now, the beast is giving a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words. Like what? Like, call me Son of God. Worship me. I am the Son of God. I am the Savior of the world. These were Roman titles that were given to the emperors, especially after their death, but Domitian, while he was alive. Authority was given it. This is the beast of the sea. The dragon has given its authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation, and all who dwell on the earth will worship it. So this is what it was like. The Roman Empire ruled the world. Now, people didn't know about the Americas, and they maybe knew about China and Japan or things like that, India. But this is the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is the whole world, the civilized world, the ecumeny. Okay, so in other words, it is the world. So they used to say, yes, the Romans ruled the whole world. That's what it means. Authority was given to the beast, the Roman Empire, the beast of the sea, was given authority by the devil to rule over every tribe and people and tongue and nation, every single nation. Now remember, the Roman Empire wasn't homogeneous. The Romans had conquered lots and lots of different nations and tribes and people, not just the Jews, but the Greeks and people in North Africa and people in Gaul and people elsewhere in Italy. There's lots of different nations that came under the umbrella of Rome. And all of this was done by the power of the devil. That's what he's saying. And everyone will worship it, right? Because it's been ordered. Everybody's going to worship the Roman Empire. Everyone whose name has not been written in the book of life of the Lamb that was slain before the foundation of the world. That's strange. How could the Lamb be slain before the foundation of the world? That language, by the way, is in our prayers. Have you ever heard that before? Before the Lamb, how can the Lamb, that's Christ, be slain, be sacrificed, die on the cross before the foundation of the world? That is that means that God knew before creating the world that he would have to send the Son. The Holy Trinity knew that the Son would have to become incarnate before they ever made the world. So when Adam and Eve sinned, it's not like, oh no, what do I do now? God has to come up with plan B. Oh, I've got to send the Son to take care of this. They already knew that humans would sin. They already knew that the Son would become incarnate, that he would die on the cross, all of that. So that's what that means, and that's a theological thing. Okay, the beast of the sea. If anyone has an ear, this is John speaking to the church. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken to captivity he goes. If anyone slays with a sword, he must be slain. This is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. In other words, if that is your destiny to die by the sword, to be taken to captivity, you're going to go to captivity. What are you supposed to do? Endure and be faithful. That's why there's no such thing as a rapture. This is the point of the book of Revelation, to remain faithful, to endure to the end, regardless of what it is that God has allowed happen to you. God allowed this to happen to you. And your job is to remain faithful. And so this is a famous, beautiful, famous ancient painting with a lion, and the Christians are praying here in the arena. So this is a description by the Roman historian Tacitus of what happened to the Christians during the reign of Nero after the fire, when he was trying to blame the Christians for the fire of Rome, because the people of Rome blamed him. By the way, Nero wanted to build this palace just for parties because he was very perverted, engaged a lot of kinky things and debauchery and all kinds of weird stuff. He wanted to build a palace just for parties, but he wanted to build it in the best neighborhood of Rome. Well, that's where there were homes of very wealthy, aristocratic Roman families. They had been there for hundreds of years. So there was no room. So by chance, this fire comes along, clears everything out. Now, he builds his palace. It's called the Golden House because every square inch of the walls, inside and out, was covered in gold leaf. You can imagine what it looked like. It wasn't a regular palace. It was just for parties. And around it, he built a huge garden, of many acres, including an artificial lake, including a massive statue of himself, 90 feet tall, called the Colossus of Nero. So Nero, of course, the fire, people were so angry about the fire and the devastation that followed. And afterwards, you have the civil war going on in Rome. When Vespasian came, the Flavian, the first of the Flavian dynasty, he was a commander, a general who was fighting the Jews in Judea. He comes back to Rome to become the next emperor and puts an end to all the fighting. One of the ways he wanted to erase the memory of Nero is that he is the one who commissioned the Colosseum to be built, something for the people. And the Colosseum was built on the site of Nero's pleasure palace, the Golden House. And that artificial lake, they had water, which was sometimes, I don't know if you know about this, but in the Colosseum, they had the capability of flooding the floor of the Colosseum and having battle scenes, having with ships and everything. And that was because of the water and stuff that had been arranged by Nero. So that's why doesn't exist anymore, Nero's Golden House, because on that site is today the Colosseum, and that's because of Vespasian. So here's the Roman historian Tacitus. Consequently, to get rid of the report, which accused Nero of setting fire to the city of Rome, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians, by the populace. Accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty. Then, upon their information, by the way, who would plead guilty to setting fire to they didn't set fire to the city of Rome, but they were tortured, especially if they were slaves. Slaves had to be examined under torture, and they probably confessed. If there was anybody who confessed, they confessed under torture. And upon their information, an immense multitude was convicted, not so much for the crime of firing the city as of hatred against mankind. Do you know that word? Misanthropos. Hatred of mankind. That's what they were accused of. Being atheists because they didn't worship the Roman gods, and being misanthropes. And they're hated for their abominations. Well, the abomination is the Holy Eucharist, because people said they were cannibals, because they knew enough. They've heard about eating the body and drinking the blood. And also they were accused of practicing incest, because Christians would call each other brother and sister, even a married couple. So people thought that they were committing incest. Mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. Now, this is something that was done purposefully. It's part of Roman ritual of killing a person, especially for a, we could say, political crime, to make fun of them, to the mockery. It was part of killing somebody. It's not enough just to kill them. You have to shame them. You have to embarrass them. That's part of the cross, by the way. So mockery of every sort was added to their deaths, covered with the skins of beasts. They were torn by dogs or perished and were nailed to crosses or were, what does it say? Doomed to the flames and burnt to serve as nightly illumination when daylight had ended. And this is in Nero's, this is because Nero was doing this. This is when Nero had built his palace, pleasure palace, his golden house, and had the gardens. He tied Christians to poles, like a telephone pole, and covered them with tar and lit them on fire as tiki torches to illuminate his parties. So can you imagine? You have burning human beings, and that's just to have enough light so that you could have a party outdoors in the summertime. That's Nero. Nero offered his gardens for the spectacle. That's what we're talking about. And I can't even see it. I should probably come down here. And exhibiting a show in the circus while he mingled with the people in the dress of a charioteer or stood aloft on a car. Hence, even for criminals who deserved extreme exemplary punishment, this is what Tacitus thinks, there was a feeling of compassion, for it was not, as it seemed, for the public good, but to glut one man's cruelty that they were being destroyed. So that's Nero. And one of the things that was very embarrassing for the Romans is that he liked to dress as a charioteer. That was kind of like the NASCAR of those days. But chariot drivers were always, and they were big heroes. People had their favorite drivers, but they were always slaves because it was very dangerous. So it was embarrassing for the Roman public that Nero would be dressed like a charioteer. And by the way, he wanted to participate in the chariot races. So he actually got in a chariot and got involved in a race, which of course he won. You know, no one would be too smart to beat him. Even though he fell out of the chariot twice, he still managed to win the race and thought he was wonderful. Same thing, he entered poetry and music contests. He fancied himself a great artist. So he would go to places like Delphi in Greece and or enter these music and poetry contests, and people were obliged to stay and listen to him sing or recite his poetry. And it could go on for hours. No one was allowed to leave the theater. Women literally went into labor and gave birth to babies in the theaters. And also, or men feigned heart attacks so they could be taken out to get out. I'm not kidding. This is told to us by these Roman historians. Nero martyred 977 Christians. The most famous, of course, are Peter and Paul. I'm certain that there were others. We don't know who they are, but there were some very famous people living in Rome at the time, like Priscilla and Aquila, and quite a few others. So these were the beast of the earth. Okay, so we talked about the beast of the sea. We're going to get back to Nero in a moment. But the dragon stands on the shore of the sea, and he calls up the first beast. That's the beast of the sea. That's the Roman Empire and the Roman emperor. Remember, they're blended together. The ruler is identified with the empire. Then I saw another beast who rose out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb. It spoke like a dragon. So it looked innocent, but it had the voice of the dragon. It means it's the voice of the devil. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence. And it makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose mortal wound had healed. This is a very important beast. This is the beast of the earth or the beast of the land. So you can't really see this very well. He's handing his scepter over. The beast of the sea, seas on the sea. He's handing his scepter over to the beast of the land. He's got a very similar description in some ways to this beast. Now, who's the beast of the land? That is the Roman governor. It is the Roman governor who has the responsibility for ensuring emperor worship takes place. In other words, look at he says he has all the authority of the first beast in his presence. So all the authority, the Roman governor came to the province with what was called the imperium. That is the authority of the emperor. The governor is acting in the person of the emperor. He's acting with all the power of the emperor. So one of his jobs is to make sure that people worship the emperor. That's the beast of the earth. That's the Roman governor. In a place like Judea, it's Pilate. But this wasn't happening in Judea. This is happening in Asia. And he worked great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in the sight of men. And by the signs which it allowed to work in the presence, it deceived those who were on the earth, bidding them to make an image of the beast which was wounded by the sword and lived. So they're making an image of the emperor. So in every place, every public place, and in public squares and things, there was a statue of the emperor. It's the same as a flag. They didn't have flags. So instead, they had a statue of the emperor, whoever it was, in every public place and public buildings, and people were supposed to bow down in front of it. So what was I going to say here? Oh, yeah. What about this making fire come down from heaven? They are talking about how they were capable of doing things which impress people and make them think they could do magic. So just like today, you have people who do magic. I mean, not black magic, but actual, like for performances. People were skilled in those things also. And they knew how to take certain substances and make fire suddenly pop out. And people were really impressed by that. They thought they had actual powers. That's why we hear about people like Simon Magus and like this magician that St. John the Apostle was opposing on the village of Patmos, who was really practicing idolatry. They had powers that were to deceive people. This is what it's talking about. It deceives those. We're still talking here about the beast of the earth, which is the Roman emperor. It deceives those who dwell upon the earth, bidding them to make an image of the beast, which was wounded by the sword and lived. Of course, that's the Roman emperor. So the beast of the earth is responsible for identifying people with the mark of the beast. What is the mark of the beast, and how does one receive it? Pay attention. It was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast so that the image of the beast could even speak. So let's just pause there for a minute. We know that they had huge statues that had fire that would come out of the mouth of the statue, and also a voice would come out of the mouth of the statue. They had tricky ways of making that happen. Somebody would be inside, the statue was hollow. They'd climb up inside of it. It would look like there was nothing around, no way to get inside the statue. But we know that this happened. And there are other ancient documents that talk about these sort of miraculous things that are coming from idols. That's what it's talking about. So this is how they deceive people. And it caused those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. It also caused all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be marked on the right hand and the forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is, the name of the beast and the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let him who has understanding reckon the number of the beast, for it is a human number. It is 666. So, how do you avoid the mark of the beast? By not worshiping it, by refusing to worship the image of the beast. This is the beast of the land, causes those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. How do you get the image? How do you get the mark? When you worship the beast, okay? That's what it says. So the right hand of the forehead, let's go ahead and talk about the image, the mark of the beast, 666. So Jehovah's Witnesses consider the 666 to stand for human governments. They're opposed to all kinds of governments. They believe them to be satanic. They believe the cross to be satanic and a lot of other things. So they believe that they're going to be ultimately persecuted, and they're very anti any kind of, especially government, anything official, don't serve in the military or anything like that. Seventh-day Adventists believe 666 stands for Sunday worship. They're very opposed to that. They worship on Saturdays. They think it's very demonic to worship on a Sunday, and they believe that one day the government will try to force them all to worship on Sunday. That's what 666 is for them. Martin Luther thought the 666 stood for the Pope. Not surprisingly, the Pope thought it stood for Martin Luther. It's probably more true than the Pope. And also, not surprisingly, after the rise of Islam, many Christians thought it was a reference to Mohammed. And you could understand why, because of the persecution. And frankly, that's one reason. This is when the East began to pay more attention to Revelation, when they were suffering a lot of Islamic persecution. And especially, there was more and more interest in the book of Revelation in the East, as it looked increasingly like the city of Constantinople was going to fall. This is when we see the largest number of manuscripts being copied in the East in the 1200s and 1300s, right before the fall of Constantinople, as it shrinks and is more and more threatened. They said, oh, this is the end of the world. Okay, political interpretations. Social Security numbers. When President Roosevelt issued Social Security numbers, a lot of people didn't want one. They were concerned about it. They said, it's the mark of the beast. How about this? Do you remember before we had supermarket barcodes, they started appearing on packages, and people were saying, what is this? I remember that. I was young, but I remember it. What are these lines? Before they had the scanners, but we were seeing these marks, and people said, oh, this is the mark of the beast. Here's another one. People said Reagan was the beast because he has 6 letters in each of his 3 names. Ronald Wilson Reagan. Believe it or not, this was something I heard in the 80s. Another one, computer chips, that they're going to put a computer chip under your skin and you're going to be controlled, and that's what that is. Of course, I should have added here the COVID vaccine. All right, that's another one that people were saying. It's the mark. No, seriously, I should have put it in. I should put it in. So what is the mark of the beast? It's a sign that somebody belongs to the dragon. Who's the dragon? The devil. Why do we write our names on items like books, or we have a registration card in our car with our name on it? It means that it shows ownership, okay? If you have the mark of the beast, that is the devil, the beast is causing the worship of the devil. The beast gets his power from the devil, okay? You belong to him, he owns you. So the beast is, remember, the worship of the beast is caused by the devil. So when we worship anything other than God, that is the work of the devil. That's what the devil wants. He wants us to worship him, but he does it through our worshiping of other things other than God, and in this case, whoever has the power, and that's the beast. How do you receive the mark of the beast? Now, every time the mark of the beast is mentioned in Revelation, it's connected with the worship of the image. And if you don't believe me, you can read it again for yourself. So the mark of the beast, people make it into all kinds of things, but in this case, it's the worship of the statue of the emperor. Every time that is mentioned in Revelation, it says that those who do not worship the image are slain because they would not worship the image of the beast. Those who do worship the statue receive the mark. It causes all, both small and great and rich and poor and slave and free, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead. So there's other passages that show the link between idolatry and receiving the mark, okay? The angel pours this bowl on the people who bore the mark of the beast and worshipped its image. Notice that. The mark of the beast goes together with worshiping the image. You belong to the devil if you're in worshiping the emperor. Again, those who had not worshipped the beast or its image and had received this mark on their foreheads and their hands. Why the forehead and the hand? What's the significance of this? Because the hand represents our deeds, and the forehead represents what we think. So the devil controls our deeds and our thoughts. That's what that means. And it was very difficult for many Christians in different periods of time, including today, in places where Christians are still suffering persecution. And that's happening in Africa, it's happening in the Middle East, it's happening in China, it's happening in many places. And sometimes it's very, very difficult to avoid participation because there was a pressure. Here it says, no one can buy or sell unless he receives the mark of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let him who has understanding reckon the number of the beast. It is a human number. The number is 666. This is a coin of Nero. What's really interesting about Roman coins is that they really looked like the person. Okay, they really did. Here's Nero kind of in the middle of his life. When he started out, he was only 18 when he became emperor. And he was okay because he was getting very good advice from certain advisors like Seneca, the Roman philosopher. Coins of Nero show a very skinny kid with a very pronounced Adam's apple, the early coins. Then as he gets older, you see him getting got a thick neck here and has lost his nice jawline. And then later he's got like a triple chin. He became very, very fat. So the coins actually changed as he got older. After a while, after struggling to be a good emperor when he was 18, 19, 20, got tired of it, just wanted to have fun. So this is when he developed all these very bad habits. So this is Nero. So we're going to go ahead and talk about 666. No one can buy or sell unless he has a mark that is the name of the beast or its number of its name. So this did happen when people felt forced, and so they couldn't really buy or sell. They couldn't go to the market. This, in some ways, it did happen during COVID when there were people who didn't want to be vaccinated and they lost their jobs. This is something that could happen to us in the future, where we're being forced by the government. I don't think it's impossible to imagine a day when the government might force us to commit certain acts that we believe are not Christian, or to go along with things that we don't accept in order to survive economically. That happened in the past. Christians were often ostracized, and they couldn't go to the market. They couldn't buy or sell. So this is possible, and so we have to be careful about this. So this is why the 666 means Nero Caesar. The Jews did not have numbers. When we look at these numerals, this number 5, number 2, number 6, these are Arabic numerals, right? The Jews didn't have other symbols that stood for numbers, nor did the Greeks. They used the letters of the alphabet. We still do this in the church. If you look at the Greek side of something that's being read, like, let's say it's an epistle, you have it in Greek and in English. In Greek, it will say Alpha, A, Corinthians, and the English side will say 2, letter 2, second, or Alpha, 1, Corinthians, Vita, Corinthians. So in the church, we still use this. So Alpha is 1, Vita is 2, Gamma is 3, and then as you go through the alphabet, well, 6 is Sigma Tau, and then 7 is Zeta, and then Theta, Iota is 10, Lambda is 20, Mi, until you go to like the number. If you see the number, look if you have a prayer book where it has the 50th Psalm, in English it will say the letter N. That stands for the number 50 in Greek. It's 50 on the English side, but on the Greek side it will say N. Okay? So Omicron is 70, so it refers to the Septuagint. It will say Omicron, the letter O. So every word, especially names, had a numerical equivalent. You can write out somebody's name in Greek and add up the letters, and they have a certain numerical value. In our case here, the Jews did the same thing. Aleph was 1, Bayeth was 2, Gimel was 3, etc. Nero Caesar adds up to 666. Nun Resh Vav, Nun Kof Samech Resh. This is the equivalent of 666. So it's like the perfect number of evil. Why is that? Because evil always tries to imitate good. And so 6 is very close to 7. So it's trying to look like 7, trying to look like it's good, but it's actually the epitome of evil. So this is, the 666 stands for Nero Caesar. Now, if Revelation was written long after Nero, during the era of Domitian, how can the beast be Nero? So there is kind of a trend right now among some Bible scholars to say that Revelation was written earlier during the reign of Nero because of the allusions to Nero. Let me ask you a question. How can Trump be called Hitler? Aren't people saying that over and over and over? Hitler's long been dead. You see, people want to say somebody is really evil, really harmful. They'll say he's Hitler. It's the same thing here. Nero is identified with evil because he was the epitome of evil and perversion. He was the first person, the first Roman emperor to persecute the Christians. So this is why he is the epitome of evil. So there's something else. When Domitian began to persecute the Christians, people said Nero has come back. And there was this kind of legend. This is what happened. Because Nero committed suicide, he never received a state funeral. He was they got rid of the body in dishonor. And so there was this rumor that was rampant in the Roman Empire that he had gone to live with the Parthians. That was this enemy nation to the east, and he was going to come back. And that was called Nero Redivivus, Nero revived. So there was this kind of legend about it. Also, the coins that minted by Augustus Caesar didn't use the divine symbols for the emperor really until Nero. So Nero was the one who started this emperor worship about himself. Also because symbols are multivalent and fluid, and also because the concept is the same, that he is the successor of the Roman emperor, and also because he's like the epitome of evil. That's why it's him. So it's like the church is saying, with the persecution by Domitian, John is saying the 666, it's Nero all over again. In other words, what's happening to us now happened to the people in Rome under Nero. Okay, Armageddon. I'm trying to see when I'm supposed to stop talking. In just a few minutes. Where will it be fought? Who's going to be fighting it? The plain of Megiddo is a big flat plain. This is because people used to fight big battles with chariots. So they didn't fight in mountains, they fought in big plains. And there's a big flat plain called Megiddo, and the mountain above it is probably where we get the word Armageddon, because the Hebrew word for mountain is Har-Megiddo. So it becomes Armageddon. And this is supposedly the place where there will be a fight between the heavenly armies and the worldly powers. So who's going to win? So this is something else. We think about Armageddon. We think about nuclear war, right? Armageddon, Trump and Putin. I guess that's Biden. Trump, Armageddon. Is it Obama? Is he going to bring about Armageddon? Everybody thought, there was a lot of concern about President Reagan. He's going to start a nuclear war because he was trying to prevent that. You know, we have back in the 60s, some of us remember this. Do you remember the drop drills? Did you have those things where you had to prepare for nuclear war? Kids today cannot imagine. But we had drop drills in case of a nuclear attack. We're supposed to go under our desks and hide. That was our drop. We called it drop. It was like we have earthquake drills. California, do you have tornado drills or anything like that here? We have earthquake drills, and we used to have what they call drop drills. They never told us kids it was for nuclear war, but the adults all knew it. Well, that's not going to help you if there's a nuclear war, but this has been going on. People have been worried about this forever. There you go, Hitler, Stalin. So Armageddon, what I want to get to, because we're going to run out of time here, is the idea that Armageddon is about the meeting of these heavenly armies with worldly armies. So I really want to get to, because it's mentioned a few places here about how there's going to be this massive destruction. But the most important part, let's get to chapter 20. Okay, this big destruction. You can hardly, okay. Now, this is the very end of it. This is in chapter 20. We're going to talk about this after the break. When the 1,000 years are ended, we'll talk about that later, Satan will be released from his prison. He will come out to deceive the nations, which are at the four corners of the earth. He's going to deceive all kinds of people, the Gog and Magog, gather them together for battle. Their number is of the sand of the sea. You can't even count the grains of the sand of the sea. It seems like they can't have the other armies, the armies of heaven can't possibly win. There's so many of them. They marched up over at the broad earth and surrounded the camp of the saints. That's the church. But fire came out from heaven and consumed them. Okay, So where is the big battle? It isn't there. I want you to think about the fact that we're going to stop there for a moment. If there's a war, Armageddon is not going to be between Russia and the United States or China and the United States. If there's a war, God forbid, a World War III, that is not Armageddon. Armageddon is the fight between good and evil, between God and Satan. You see what I'm trying to say? Because people want to say, well, Russia, it's so sad that today, because we're Orthodox, so we have an affinity for Russia, but it's being totally demonized in the culture as like the epitome of evil, right? Now, Putin, that's nothing to do with what Putin is doing. But the point is, the Russian nation is no more evil than the American nation. The American nation is no more good than the Russian nation. We have good and evil in every nation of the world. It's not a fight between worldly powers. It's a fight between good and evil. Who's going to win? God. So notice he just breathes upon them. And as it says in the scriptures, God destroyed them with the breath of his mouth. It's not a contest. So it's nothing to be worried about. If another war comes, we're going to deal with it like all the other wars. But it's not Armageddon. Because Armageddon is between good and evil. And no nation on the world has a monopoly on good. And no nation in the world has a monopoly on evil. The message of Revelation clearly states that it's about the events of the immediate future. The revelation Jesus Christ God gave him to show what must soon take place. We talked about that already. Okay, so he's talking about what's going to happen at that time, that this is about the future. We already discussed this. So prophecy includes the present and the future at the time that John received the prophecy. Okay, so a lot of details we're not going to recognize. There might be things in the future that we see that are part of Revelation. They're going to be fulfilled in the future, but we're not going to recognize it at the time, because most of the time that's what happens. So, are there any questions or comments? Yes, go ahead.
You mentioned that there's not a rapture, which for many of us in here who were Protestant converts, of course, that was an important part.
It's a big part of being a Protestant convert.
Yeah. So can you explain, for those who may not know where that notion came from?
Where did the rapture come from?
Yes.
The rapture was an idea that was invented by somebody about 200 years ago in England. He had his name was Darby. He had what he called a revelation or sort of enlightenment, some sort of from Jesus Christ, that before Christ comes back, he's going to take up to heaven suddenly all of the righteous people, and they would not suffer through the tribulations of the end times. It was a private revelation. In other words, he's the one who had this idea. It didn't become very popular until this idea was included in the footnotes of the Bible, which was very popular among Protestants in the late 1800s. And that's how it got into the Protestant mainstream, and everybody assumes it is correct. But the rapture was never taught by the early church. And in fact, what Christ says over and over and over again is that we have to be prepared to suffer for him. What Revelation is saying over and over and over again is that we have to be prepared to suffer and to remain faithful throughout our suffering for Christ. There's nothing that suggests that the faithful, that the Christians will be spared the tribulations of the end times, but this has become just standard interpretation. You can't, what he did was he had this idea, and then he looked for verses in the Bible to support that, and he took verses out of their context. And so the problem with the rapture, there's many. I have a podcast that I did recently about the rapture and what's wrong with it. So you could find that. I don't know that I've posted it yet on orthodoxbiblestudy.info, but I will. I probably haven't yet. But I talk about what's wrong with it. First of all, it's a doctrine that nobody believed until 200 years ago. Would you believe that that's actually accurate? Is there some doctrine about the end times that we never heard of, and all of a sudden one person has this idea and now millions of people believe it? Can you see how wrong that is? If it was something true, if it was something we needed to know, the Lord would have told us, but he tells us the opposite. We have to be prepared to suffer through the tribulations for the sake of Jesus Christ. That's the point of revelation. The other problem with rapture is that it doesn't make sense according to everything else, besides the fact that the Lord told us we have to be faithful to him and suffer through tribulations. It doesn't fit what he says. He says that when he returns, he will judge the sheep and the goats. That's what we heard about in church last week. So that doesn't fit the scenario that we know of from Christ. So let's say that he comes back and he just raptures up the good people. Well, how do we know who's good without a judgment? Doesn't there have to be a judgment? So one of the things that they'll say is he's going to take up the good people, rapture them up, snatch them up into heaven, so they won't go through the tribulations. And the tribulations of the end times are just for the evil people. We're going to see in our next segment that that is not true. We're going to talk about the purpose of the plagues. The purpose of the plagues is not to punish sinners. That's hell. Hell is for the punishment of sinners, but the tribulation of the end times is not for the punishment of people. So if you follow that, you have to have some kind of judgment that takes place that determines who's going to be raptured up. And then there's going to be this tribulation, this hell on earth, according to their idea. And then what's going to happen? How is there going to be? Is there going to be a third coming of Jesus Christ? When is the judgment going to happen? He has to come again. Well, there's no third coming of Christ. So it's a manufactured doctrine, which is really harmful because it doesn't encourage people to be prepared to really sacrifice for Christ. They have this false hope that they don't have to worry about anything. Jesus is just going to take them up. And it also is very scary to a lot of kids. I've had a lot of people tell me they were traumatized by it. You're nodding your head. Was that your experience as a kid? You were traumatized by the idea that you would be left behind?
Oh yeah, I used to stand at the foot of my parents' bed and watch them sleep to see if they were raptured.
This, I've heard that from other people. She said, I used to stand at the foot of my parents' bed to watch them sleep to see if they were raptured. I've had people tell me that when they lost their parents, like in a supermarket or something, they were terrified that their parents had been raptured. A lot of people are terrified by this, and it's one of the ways that they control people by frightening them into believing this doctrine that no one heard of until 200 years ago that was invented by one person. And it's very harmful. Father, go ahead.
Do you think this teaching about the rapture is an offshoot of predestination?
Is a teaching of the rapture an offshoot of predestination? I'm sure there are people who believe in both, but I don't think you have to believe in predestination. You just have to be saved. So it's the people who identify themselves as saved who believe that they're going to go up and be with Jesus. I want to answer one question that somebody asked me at the break, and that was about the Edict of Claudius. When I said that the first Roman persecution was by Nero around the year 66 because of the fire that happened in 65. Let me talk about the Edict of Claudius, which took place in the year 49. This is how we know that the Romans did not distinguish between Christians and Jews because of the Edict of Claudius. So in the year 49, the Emperor Claudius demanded or required, he issued an edict that all Jews leave the city of Rome. Jews, not Christians. This is not Christian persecution. Now, why did he require all Jews to leave the city of Rome? Because there were big arguments in the synagogue. There was a lot of violence and a lot of disruption in the Jewish synagogues of the city of Rome. And we think that they were arguing about whether Jesus was the Christ. So Christianity was there. The Christian faith had reached Rome such that there were huge arguments. How do we know this? Because Roman historians tell us that there were arguments in the synagogue over Christus, instigated by Christus, in Latin, C-H-R-E-S-T-U-S. That's Christos. The Romans didn't understand that there wasn't a guy running around named Christus who was causing trouble. That's what they thought. We got to find this Christus guy who's causing trouble. They couldn't find him because they were arguing about whether Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah. And so they couldn't stop all of these disputes. And the Romans always insisted on order. So they forced all the Jews to leave the city of Rome. So it's not a persecution of Christians, but it happened because The gospel had come to Rome and the Jews were arguing about it. But that shows us that the Romans weren't aware of the Christian movement inside Judaism. It wasn't a separate religion. It was a movement within Judaism. They weren't aware of it. By the time Nero gets to the throne, he does understand that there's a separate group called the Christians. Okay? It's time for a break. Oh, we're a little bit beyond past time. We're supposed to start again 3:15. How about if we start at 3:30? There are snacks ready for you in the hall. So this gives you 20 minutes to get a snack, something to drink, and come back at 3:30 when we'll have our last session, okay?